Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier, China strongly condemned the U.S. military action in Venezuela, saying it violated international law. At the UN Security Council's emergency meeting, China referred to U.S.'s move as unilateral, illegal and bullying acts. Notably, Maduro's last diplomatic engagement before his extraction was with a delegation from China. Maduro told China's special envoy in the presidential palace in Caracas that China was like an older brother. So what does Maduro's capture mean for China? Let us explain. Both countries have had close ties for decades. Ties were strengthened further with the establishment of an all-weather strategic partnership in 2023. A bulk of Venezuelan oil exports flew to China, even though Beijing declares little. As per analytics firm Vortexa, imports to China hit 470,000 barrels per day in 2025. Beijing has also been giving credit to Caracas in exchange for oil purchases. As per aid data, Venezuela is the fourth biggest recipient of loans from Chinese official lenders, with about 106 billion in commitments between 2000 and 2023. Estimates suggest that Venezuela's debt to China stands at about $10 billion. Hence, China could be more concerned about the money owed rather than the oil itself. China National Petroleum Corporation and Sinopec Group are among a handful of foreign firms still operating in Venezuela. The economic impact on China will depend on who takes control of Venezuela. But another big question remains, will US's action offer a template for China's ambition of sovereignty over Taiwan? China's ruling Communist Party claims a self-governing democracy as its territory despite never having controlled it. Beijing has also been ramping up its military intimidation of Taiwan. It recently held military drills around Taiwan, simulating the seizure and blockade of the island's key areas. The biggest deterrence for China in launching an attack is that Taiwan has the promise of support from the US in the event of an attack. So what will be China's next move? I'm joined by Shaun Rein, founder and managing director of China Market Research. Shaun, thank you very much for joining us. How do you think China will now come to the support of Venezuela? And how does this change equations between the US and China?
Well, it's great to be here. I think, frankly, China is going to just condemn the actions by the United States to kidnap Maduro, the president of Venezuela. And they're going to try to build a coalition of people from the global south or the global majority and try to say to the United States, this is wrong. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, China is an economic superpower, but it can't really project military power outside of its borders close to its areas. So, you look, the United States, Western Europe, they look at China as the boogeyman. They say that China is looking to invade the rest of the world, take over and implement the Chinese value system. But here's the thing, China only has 2 military bases outside of China, while America has over 800 bases in over 80 countries. If China wouldn't come to the rescue of Maduro from a military standpoint, it's because it doesn't have the projection capability of military strength that the United States has and which the United States thinks wrongly China has. China is not going to push back hard militarily. They'll just complain. But really, at the end of the day, there's nothing that China can do to stop Trump.
Right. We've been reading reports today in Bloomberg, for example, and they've been saying that China has asked banks to report their exposure to Venezuela after the U.S. actions. Different reports say that Beijing has lent upwards of $60 billion in oil-backed loans until 2015. And Venezuela is the fourth biggest recipient of loans from Chinese official lenders, receiving up to $106 billion in commitments between 2000 and 2023. How do you think China will be impacted if their loans, their credit to Venezuela gets stuck somehow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here's the reality. China, I think, has made a mistake over the last 5-10 years. They have bailed out Caracas repeatedly with billions and billions of loans. And the question is, will they ever get paid back? And if Trump comes in and he says, I run Venezuela and they need to pay us back for nationalizing Chevron, Texaco, Exxon, and all of the other American oil giants 20, 30 years ago, the question is, will Venezuela ever pay China back? And I think this is going to make Beijing really think twice about the One Belt, One Road initiative. So, Americans look at it as a nefarious, debt trap diplomacy. I don't really see it as that. This was China trying to move excess capacity outside of China. You can only build so many roads or so many subways in China. So they wanted to create more business opportunities in the global majority. But also, frankly, this was a way to build economic integration and influence and friendship with a lot of these other nations, right? China right now is the largest trade partner of 140 countries. That's up from about 40 countries only 20 years ago. So I think Beijing is going to think, should we keep doing this One Belt, One Road initiative? Because we might lose $50–60 billion in Venezuela. What could happen in Kenya? What could happen in the rest of Africa if these countries can't pay back? Because at the end of the day, the Chinese economy is weak right now. And local governments especially have run out of money. In some provinces like Henan, the local buses aren't working right now because the local governments can't afford to maintain their bus fleets. So money is something that's really at the top of mind of Beijing right now, and they're very concerned about the money, even more than access to the sour crude coming from Venezuela, that with the collapse of the Maduro regime.
Do you feel that US's actions were also driven to somehow hurt China economically? 2025 was all about China using rare earths as a leverage. And that was part of global headlines for the full 2025. Do you think this is United States' way of trying to show the leverage it has with its military power that it can project?
Yeah, I think taking over Venezuela, the way they've done is to sort of shake and threaten China as well as Russia and express their muscular diplomacy in like a new Trump doctrine that replaces the Monroe Doctrine. But I think at the end of the day, China beat, or so far has beat, the United States in the trade war because it has access to rare earths. So I think that sent a warning signal to DC and to Trump where they realized they needed to capture access to rare earths as well as oil and just in general commodities, because China has access to the raw materials, raw commodities, but they also control refining by building up big factories in China. So I think what Trump is doing with Venezuela, it's basically plundering Venezuela's natural resources to get access to oil. It's threatening China not to do anything in Taiwan. And very importantly, I think that Trump is going to take over Greenland. Like, who's going to stop him there? Denmark, NATO? I mean, they've been very weak, been spineless over the last few months to the Trump regime. And at the end of the day, Trump is going to want Venezuela's oil, and he's going to want all of the rare earths that are in Greenland. Because again, China has the upper hand in the trade war because they control access to commodities and access to the refining technology and manufacturing capabilities in China.
Right. Shaun, China is the biggest buyer of Venezuelan crude oil, which accounts for roughly 4% of its oil imports. How is China set to get impacted if the US were to, as they intend to do, run the Venezuelan oil fields? They don't want to run the country, they want to run the oil fields.
Yeah, this could be an issue, but right now only about 4% of China's oil needs actually come from Venezuela. They get a lot more oil from Iran. So I think the bigger issue is what happens if Tehran collapses. And a lot of people are wondering, a lot of Tehran's closest partners, Gaza, Syria, Venezuela, all of these countries that are, partners with Iran have collapsed in the last year or two. Is Iran next? Now, I'm not a specialist on that part of the world, but from an oil standpoint, if China were to lose Iran and Venezuela, that would have a big problem for China's industry, since so much oil is consumed to power the automobiles and obviously the factories. Now, on the good side, China has been moving away from oil and has been decoupling from relying on that by working with NEV. So right now, over 50% of new auto sales in China in 2025 were actually electric new energy vehicles. But yeah, this would have a major hit on China's economy if Trump were to say any Venezuelan entity or any of the American oil giants that are plundering oil from Venezuela are not allowed to export to China. That would have a big impact on the economy and might knock a 0.5% off of GDP.
Right. What do you think are some of the levers that China is likely to use now in the coming months? We've heard China and the UN Security Council, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, they've taken the actions in Venezuela very seriously. In the coming weeks, are we going to see them double down, put tighter controls on, say, rare earth magnets? Do you think US companies importing from China could face more restrictions?
Yeah, I don't think China's going to be loud. They're going to be quiet. So they're not going to launch massive economic sanctions on the United States. They are not going to rally support to sort of condemn the United States from a economic sanction standpoint. But what I do see them doing is slowly putting pressure on the United States. Now, it might not be rare earths because they're going to say we did a deal with Trump in November and we don't want to go back to the trade war. But I could see it being on exports of other important materials, that are not rare earths, like silver or nickel or other metals that are important into the industry in the United States as well into weapon manufacturing. So I think you could see that there could be a lot of shortages in the United States, or the threat of shortages in the United States of metals and other, not rare earths, but other important key inputs like rare earths.
All right. Thank you so much, Shaun, for joining us on the program, giving us your view on how China sees the situation in Venezuela, the cues that China takes for the future, and how 2026 may be with regard to US-China relations. Thanks once again. That's a wrap on another edition of